Good afternoon, everybody. This is Chad Meadows with CodeWright. We are waiting to get started. Zach Gordon with the town's planning department is going to do a quick project introduction for all of us, and then we'll go ahead and get underway with the webinar. Zach, whenever you're ready.
Good afternoon, I believe it's afternoon, to everyone who's joining us either through the town's YouTube channel or via Teams. We're glad that you have tuned in. Welcome to the comprehensive UDO assessment presentation. This presentation will provide an overview of the efforts to date that our consultant has progress that he's made thus far in reviewing our UDO. Essentially, he is going to focus on two areas. One will be a summary of stakeholder input that has been received to date, and the second is a series of observations on the code itself, broad comments and general observations. And all of this is for the purpose of identifying areas where either the code can be improved or made clearer, or where there are other enhancements that are necessary. So I'm going to turn this over to Chad Meadows from CodeWright, and we'll begin. There'll be opportunity if you're attending this via Teams to submit questions through the chat box. And for those that are on YouTube, you can enjoy the presentation. And following this, you can contact the planning department with any questions that you might have. And so, Chad, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Zach. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you all so much for taking some time to be with us today. We're going to take the next 60 minutes or so and talk a little bit more about the Comprehensive UDO Assessment Project. This is a webinar that we are conducting. I will be going over a series of slides, and if you have any questions and you are on the Teams platform, you'll have an opportunity to type those questions into the chat window. Andrew, who is with me, will be moderating today so that participants who do pose questions, Andrew will be on hand to read those out. If you have any questions about how to operate the chat window, do try to get a hold of Andrew, and he can help with that. Once he's received a question, he'll read that out loud. I will attempt to answer that question if possible, or pass it back to Zach or other town staff members. If for some reason we're not able to answer a question that's posed today, we will be answering that question at the second webinar. I'll just mention here that this is the first of two webinars. The content is identical, but they're being conducted at different times. Today is at noon. There'll be a second webinar on the 11th of September at 6 p.m. If there are questions that come up today that we are not able to answer, we will be sure to answer them at the next webinar. So that's where we'll go. Again, we're recording today's webinar, so that'll be on the town's YouTube site. And we will also be recording the webinar that we're conducting on the 11th of September. So with that, I will ask if anybody has any questions before we jump in. All right. Plenty of time to type a question in the chat. There's plenty of time for discussion throughout the presentation, so don't worry. We can always come back and cover a question that comes a little bit later. So just to give you a brief overview of what we're going to talk about today, there's 6 topic areas. I'll do a quick introduction of the project team. We'll talk about the project background and why we're here. The work program portion describes how we're going to set about reaching the goals of this project. I'll talk about stakeholder input. As Zach mentioned, we've spent some time talking with folks there in town about your UDO and the development process in general. We've made some initial recommendations based on our discussions to date, our initial review of the documents, and our knowledge of planning in North Carolina. We do have a section of the webinar that's just kind of a general discussion. If people want to hold their questions until then, that's great. Or if we want to have a general discussion through the chat window, we can have that at the time. And then finally, there'll be some next steps. So these will be the 6 areas that we cover. Again, about 60 minutes or so, and longer if we need it, and less if we don't. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and jump in. Tell you a little bit about the project team. CodeWrite Planners is a small firm. We're a land use planning consultancy in Durham, North Carolina. We were formed in 2014, though there are 4 other AICP certified planners, and together we have over 100 years of experience drafting development codes, administering development codes, preparing comprehensive plans, and just working as professional planners in local governments throughout North Carolina and the rest of the country. This map shows some of the places that we've worked in North Carolina since founding in 2014. We've drafted over 30 development codes across the state and have spent a lot of time thinking about how to write better development codes that are more predictable, easy to follow, consistent with the law, and that are effective, that result in the kinds of communities that people are seeking when they undergo these kinds of projects. The primary team members from CodeWrite on this project are myself. Again, I'm Chad Meadows. I'm the firm principal, and Andrew Ossel. Andrew has been drafting development codes for about 5 years, is working with me on numerous codes around the Charlotte region, and is running our control boards today. So thank you to Andrew for that. This is your code. This is the Harrisburg, North Carolina Unified Development Ordinance interface. You can get to this. It's served on a platform called Encode Plus, but if you just point your internet browser to Harrisburg NCUDO, you'll get a link that comes to this page. And the title of importance for us in this instance is Title 15, Land Usage. This is the Unified Development Ordinance for Harrisburg. It's comprised of 8 chapters. They are shown on the screen. You can utilize this website to see all of the various code provisions that exist in the town's current Unified Development Ordinance. And this is the site and the material that we are reviewing and providing a series of recommendations for change. And more about that in a moment. Now, how these kinds of projects typically work is that local governments seek outside consulting help through the form of a request for qualifications or a request for proposals. In October of 2024, Harrisburg issued a request for qualifications for land use firms like CodeWrite to bid on assisting the town with reviewing the current UDO and making some suggestions for improvement. There were essentially 5 objectives listed in the town's RFQ, providing clear guidance regarding development processes, ensuring compliance with the North Carolina general statutes, with any applicable federal laws, and consistency with court precedent or recent court rulings. The town is looking to, enhance or modify the existing UDO content. They're wanting to amend the provisions to be better consistent with best practices in planning across North Carolina and the Southeast. Finally, improving online usability, graphics, functionality, access to content. Those were the town's short list of things that it would like to see done as part of this code assessment process. And so we responded, and CodeWrite was happily selected as the firm to assist the town in this work. Now, we began this project in May of this year, and we did that by coming out to Harrisburg for a day of meetings with various town departments, town officials, town staff to talk about the Unified Development Ordinance, and the development review process in general. Again, these are the rules that guide land uses, where particular land uses can go in Harrisburg based on their zoning district designation, the kinds of development standards that apply to individual land uses, the processes that the town uses to establish new uses, and its enforcement provisions, how it ensures that existing land uses follow the rules that are in place. So the UDO addresses all of these aspects. Where can uses go? How are they configured? How are they operated, etc. So at the time that we talked with staff back in May, 4 basic guiding principles or objectives for the project kind of came to the surface, came to light based on these conversations. The first and most important of those was a need for more public engagement. When the town's current UDO was prepared, there's general consensus that the amount of public engagement, of opportunities to participate, was insufficient, and that this process needed to incorporate more opportunities for public engagement. And that's why you're seeing the number of meetings that we're conducting, these sorts of webinars, and the things that will transpire in the next coming months. The town is looking for options for reorganization and reformatting of the current UDO. I showed you the interface a couple of slides ago, and the town's looking for an opportunity to make that interface more useful, more predictable, easier to follow, and just a richer experience for code users, both on the computer and on PDF and in whatever print copies. Now, another big part of the project is to review and diagnose the current code provisions. The town has asked CodeWrite to conduct a very meticulous review of not just the structure and form and organization of the code itself, but also the rules that are embedded within it. How are they functioning? Are they consistent with law? Are they consistent with best practice? Are they easy to follow? Are they clear? Are they predictable? Are they likely to result in the kind of development that the people who live in Harrisburg are looking for? So that was another important guiding principle for us, is a thorough review, not just of non-substantive or structural issues, but also the substance behind the rules that are inside the UDO. And then finally, making some recommendations for improvement, operational improvement, ease of use improvement, procedural improvement, consistency with law, etc. So these are the guiding principles that we are working towards. Being very forward-facing with lots of public engagement, lots of opportunities and options for how we might go about reformatting the current UDO, some diagnosis and suggestions for improvement of substance inside the UDO, and recommendations for increased predictability, flexibility, and ease of use. So those are our guiding principles. With that, I'll just pause for 1 second and see if anybody has any questions up to this point.
And just as a refresher, if you have a question, you can post it in the chat, in the Q&A section, or by raising your hand, and I can unmute you to ask a question.
And remember, those of you who are watching on YouTube, you'll need to get in touch with town staff, pose your question there. If you have a question, we want to be sure that it gets answered, so please do share that with staff. So, talked a little bit about the project background, talked a little bit about the team. Let's talk about our work program, or how we're going to accomplish this project. So the code assessment, the UDO code assessment, has 4 tasks to it, and they're listed on the screen here. We have completed the project initiation task that was done in June of this year. That involved our coming out. We spent some time talking to various folks there in town. We also gave a presentation to the Planning and Zoning Board. We are currently involved in task 2, engagement. And engagement includes a series of stakeholder interviews, which were conducted in August. I'll talk more about those in a moment. We've got a handful of webinars that we're conducting, and there'll also be a follow-up discussion with the Planning and Zoning Board. In September, we will also begin the preparation, the drafting process for the code assessment itself. The code assessment is a written document. It includes a variety of recommendations for improvement, some examples from other places about what Harrisburg's new development ordinance might look like or could look like, depending upon whether or not the town chose to follow some of the recommendations we're suggesting. There'll also be a summary of the input that we've received up to this point. So we want to give everybody kind of the full rundown of things that can be improved, what to expect if those suggestions are followed, and what we've heard up to this point. Now, task 4, the consideration, that is where town council will actually consider the code assessment recommendations themselves. It's important to note that this is sort of the first phase of a two-phase effort. Phase 1, this part, is an assessment. How's the current code working? What kinds of things do we need to do to improve it? Phase 2 is what changes are we actually going to make to the document? Now, that is a different project. The town may choose to work with us. They may choose to work with a different firm. They may choose to do the work themselves. We don't know yet. But what we do know is that the town is committed to having an improved Unified Development Ordinance that is more workable, more predictable, more user-friendly, more consistent with state law. So that is the end goal. This is a kind of interim step along the way. What's working, what's not, and how can we improve it? So that is the work program that we have set down. Questions so far? All right, seeing none, we'll press on. Let's talk about the stakeholder input that we've received.
Chad?
So please.
Yeah, I've got a quick question. Can you expand a little bit on public engagement? I think specifically how that was processed and at this phase, for this phase of the project.
Absolutely. Thanks for the question, Zach. So as I mentioned, our first task, we came to town for a series of meetings. We met with most or all city departments. We met with town administration, and we met with the Planning and Zoning Board. And our intention was to introduce the project, introduce ourselves, talk about the work program, and begin to collect people's initial thoughts about what needed to be improved. Task 2 includes a series of discussions with stakeholders. I'll talk about that in just one second. That resulted in a summary report that identified a range of potential suggestions, improvements that folks either in the development community or in other parts of town government have identified as ways to improve the current regulation. Now, we are also doing this webinar and one more webinar, and that is one of the main opportunities for the public to, if you live, in Harrisburg, or you operate a business, or you're investing in Harrisburg, and you've had opportunity to go through the development review process, these webinars, the one today and the one being conducted on September 11th at 6 p.m. are a great opportunity for you to share your thoughts. What's worked for you? What's been a problem? What are you hearing from your neighbors and colleagues about whether or not the UDO is producing the kind of development that people want, whether the process is easy or complex, whether it results in the outcome that you anticipated or went in a different direction. So, these webinars are one of the important ways for people who maybe aren't inside the development review process world itself to learn about what we're doing and to pose their questions and make their statements. Now, I will also mention that we are interfacing with the Planning and Zoning Board. We did that in Task 1. We'll do it again in Task 2, and we'll meet with them again in Task 3. The Planning and Zoning Board is the entity that North Carolina law recognizes as a body that is responsible for hearing ideas about the UDO and making suggestions to town council about how development regulations could or should be revised for consistency with your land use policy guidance, with state law, etc. And we rely on the Planning and Zoning Board to be the eyes and ears of the community for us. Finally, there'll be public meetings with the elected officials where we'll be reviewing this information, answering their questions, and responding to what we're hearing from the community. So that is the gist of the engagement. All of that said, I would fully expect that the town, when it moves into phase 2, will probably have a more comprehensive public engagement aspect where people can review draft text and have more kind of frequent meetings that deal with particular issues under the drafting process. This assessment is a technical document. We are focusing on people with experience with the development review process. It's not a land use plan document. It is a set of development rules and regulations, the process, the procedures, the standards, and is a very technically oriented piece of work. When we move into drafting, whether that's done by us or anyone else, that's an appropriate time for people to get involved and make sure that land use policy issues, feelings about how the town should be considered or how it should be configured, those kinds of things will come into play in phase 2. Did that answer the question, Zach, or are there other things you want me to cover?
No, I think that's good, Chad. I think the most important thing is that this is not the end of the process. This is just the beginning of the process.
Right, absolutely. This is the first phase of 2, and we fully anticipate more and more opportunities for the public to learn and get involved and stay involved as we go forward. Okay, so I've talked a little bit about this, some of the stakeholder interviews that we conducted. Back in August, the consulting team conducted 11 interviews with 13 people. And there's a stakeholder input summary that has been prepared. I'm not sure if it's on the town's webpage yet, but it has been drafted. And what this document does is explain who we spoke with, and it summarizes the information that we heard. We asked folks 3 questions. What's working right now with the rules? What's not working with the rules? And are there anything either in the current regulations or the current review process that you would be upset if they changed? Now, these stakeholders are either town officials or employees, appointed officials, planning and zoning board members, board of adjustment members, but they're also members of the development community. They are people who are regularly submitting applications to Harrisburg for development approvals. They understand the process of obtaining permits, of going through plan review or rezoning, and are intimately familiar with the processes and procedures that the town uses to consider new development applications. And so in that regard, they're very familiar with the current rules and how the town applies them. We received many comments. In fact, there's about 14 pages of comments that are included in this input summary. What we've done is organize them into 8 topical areas. And I'll talk about some of the example feedback that we've gotten up to this point. So UDO clarity, structure, and usability. A fair amount of concerns here that there are numerous cross-references inside the current UDO that aren't particularly helpful, and having that additional cross-referencing may actually be a bit of an impediment to effective use of the ordinance. There are some inconsistencies between cross-references, and in some cases there are illustrations and so forth, but those are far removed from the applicable text. So the current UDO did not score as highly as we would have liked on clarity, structure, and usability. Lots and lots of comments about the development approval process. Harrisburg has an informal reputation as a difficult place to go through the development review process. And that's good and it's bad. On the good side of things, development that gets built in Harrisburg has been through the so-called ringer, if you will. The town works very hard to get the best possible development from applicants who are proposing to develop in town, and so staff and town officials really do go to the mat for town residents in terms of getting the best development quality. And that takes time, and that can be expensive for applicants. And that's probably why we hear from some development applicants that it's difficult to develop in Harrisburg. That said, we're also hearing that there's some inconsistency, that sometimes what they're hearing from staff may not line up with what's in the development code. Staff operating in good faith, pursuing the best possible development, and with their understanding about what council would likely approve or what council might not approve, passing that information on to applicants. That's all part of the process. It's very important, but it's not necessarily consistent with what the current UDO says. And so that's a challenge. Folks who review the UDO come into the development review process with one mindset, with one set of ideas about how the process is going to work, and it might not necessarily follow that process or follow those standards based on what they're proposing and how staff is aiding them and guiding them through the process. So we want to bring those two aspects into closer alignment. The development approval process needs to be clear, concise, and predictable. Now, town staff is a great resource, and everybody that we have spoken with recognizes the value that town staff brings to the development review process. And so lots and lots of comments about that. Design standards and aesthetics brought up some very interesting questions and issues. Harrisburg, very exclusive community, also a place where folks, like to have their open space. It's very nice to be on the edge of a large metro area, but yet still have a very lush, verdant community with a lot of parkland, lots of landscaping, etc., and commercial development that is that maintains a very high level of design quality. So those are some of the watchwords for staff for the UDO. And that has also resulted in some questions on the part of the development community. Are we going too far? Is it too difficult? Does the market support these kinds of questions? That's information that we have received from some of the stakeholders. So we're exploring that and talking with staff about those kinds of standpoints, those perspectives. Sustainability and environmental standards, very, very important aspects for everybody on the planet, and the town is looking to improve, do a better job with sustainability, do a better job protecting the environment, but at the same time making sure that those improvements aren't resulting in a development template that is, prohibitively expensive. So balancing cost of development with the need for sustainability, environmental preservation. Trees and landscaping, near and dear to everybody who lives in Harrisburg, at least everybody we've spoken with at this point, and there is a desire for more. People would like to see more tree preservation, more landscaping. Discussion about transportation standards and processes, again, making sure that there's consistency across different staff members. Making sure that there's applicable or available flexibility in order to deal with difficult sites or to deal with challenges that might predate a proposed development. Finally, lots of comments about residential development and housing density. We understand that this is a topic that Harrisburg is exploring now as it's looking at updating its comprehensive plan. The question of how much housing, in what locations, served by what features. Those are very, very important questions to the town's identity. And there is some concern about whether or not the town's policy guidance is in alignment with what the community is looking for. Oftentimes, when we see applications coming before council that seek to broaden the array of housing options, increase residential densities, and those applications have a tough slog of it if they are denied or it's very difficult for them to be approved, then it's time to check in with the sentiment of the community. Is that indeed what the bulk of folks who live in Harrisburg are looking for or not? So I know that the town is thinking about that, working through that, trying to create vibrant town centers, but also respecting the character that brought people to Harrisburg in the first place. So residential density and housing quality, also a topic that came up during these stakeholder discussions. Any questions about this so far? One other thing I'll mention is that these folks were identified by town staff as resources. Andrew and I are always interested in talking with people as we move through these things. If there are other voices in the community that folks feel like we need to be hearing from, we're open to having those conversations and incorporating that feedback where that makes sense. But with that, are there any questions about the stakeholder input received thus far? Okay. This document has been drafted. I am not sure if one obtains this on the town's webpage or by contacting the planning staff. If this is something that you'd like to see, I encourage you to go to the town's webpage or check with planning staff to obtain a copy. All right. That brings us to some of the initial recommendations. Again, we've had an opportunity to talk with lots of folks, always interested in talking with more. Thus far, we have a set of very initial kind of preliminary recommendations, things to consider, call it a short shopping list of potential changes to the UDO. And these recommendations fall into three different baskets. One involves the structure and formatting of the current UDO. Some other recommendations deal with current development review procedures. And then finally, the third basket are substantive changes. And I'll talk about each one of these in turn. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and jump in and let's talk about structure and formatting. Okay. Again, these are code rights recommendations. Andrew and I have put these together based on the conversations that have taken place to date. These are our opinions. They're not fact. They're subject to change as we continue to have discussions with the community. But from kind of a first look standpoint, these are some of the things that we think are possible or prudent. First is for the town to self-codify its UDO instead of using a third-party vendor, which it is using today. Further, I showed you at the head of the webinar the interface that is provided for the town's UDO. There are many, many features associated with that web interface. The ability to go and see maps and to post questions to the site about development regulations, which is great. Those are fabulous features. What we are finding, though, is that most folks just want to go and see the regulations and would prefer it if the town's resources were directed at making a document that was very easy to use, easy to follow, did not have some of the shortcomings of the current online version, and that we focus primarily on what the public needs and uses instead of so much on some of these extra features that aren't getting used that much by people. So that's one main recommendation. We want to ensure also that there is a very strong portable document format version, a PDF version, some people call it an Adobe Acrobat version. Basically a version of the code that can be reviewed on a web browser or downloaded to your computer and reviewed at your discretion without having to go onto a third-party platform or stay on the web. Now, the town has a PDF version, but it doesn't include all of the functionality of some other modern development code PDF versions. And so Our second recommendation is if the town decides to self-codify, that we couple that with a portable document format version that can be downloaded easily and that contains the full functionality of breadcrumb menus and easy navigation and search and all of the functionality that PDF is known for. So that's an important recommendation that we suggest. We'd really like to suggest the UDO be structured to follow a more intuitive chapter structure. For example, the current UDO jumps right in with zoning districts and uses. There's very little information at the front of the document about the administrative aspects, what applies, what's exempted from these rules, who are the review bodies, what are the development review process. Instead, the current UDO jumps right into the various zoning districts and uses. So that can be a little bit jarring for somebody who doesn't do this kind of work for a living. We'll also note that there's a lot of standards in the current UDO, for example, the development types provisions that are spread throughout the document, that you might have to go to 4 or 5 different places in the current UDO to get the full breadth of applicable standards to the kind of development that you want to do. And frankly, that sets up a situation where people can miss things. They didn't know to go check the definitions. They didn't know that there were provisions in the subdivision chapter that dealt with development types. They just weren't aware of that. And we would suggest that not be accomplished that way, that rather like material be put together and that we organize information so that a reader can get everything they need for the kind of development that they're doing in as few pages as possible. We'd like to suggest shortening the code's numbering system. If you have more than 5 or 6 numberings in your code numbering structure, then it becomes very unwieldy to work with. 3 or 4 is better if possible. So simplifying the numbering system so that when you're trying to find a code citation or cite a section that's in the code, you don't have to say 15-287A Romanet I sub 3-1 200, but rather, chapter 1, part 3. So trying to simplify how numbering is done. Finally, ensuring graphics are consistent with the text and proximate to the text that they relate to. It's never great to have to go 150 or 200 pages away to see the graphic that relates to the text that you're reading at that moment. So definitely would suggest some reformatting in that regard and making sure that if there are graphics in the document, that those be consistent with the text at least as much as possible. So those are our 5 main structure and formatting recommendations for a new UDO, or at least an updated UDO for Harrisburg. Any questions on that? Does anybody have any ideas or suggestions about how we might have the document be easier to follow? Is there anything that we missed in this kind of structure and formatting discussion? Okay, good. I'm going to move now to procedures. So, one thing for sure, and I mentioned this earlier, we have heard from some stakeholders that it's not always clear what the process is, and it's not always clear what the rules are. And our UDO really needs to strive to set out the minimum standards that the town expects everybody to follow. Those minimum standards should be clearly codified, and anybody who picks up the book should be able to read those, understand those, and know the rules of the game going in. It should not require staff to conduct a series of phone calls and or meetings with applicants. Though those things are good, the average person should be able to pick up the UDO, read what it says, and know what to do. If that's not happening, then the UDO is not working at its maximum efficiency, effectiveness. So we want to suggest that minimum standards be clearly codified, and we try to avoid the need for excessive amounts of interpretation by the staff. Clear, predictable. Be sure that the UDO establishes the minimum expectations for design quality. We have heard several stories from stakeholders where they've come in and have had to basically enter negotiation with staff regarding design. Now, we understand how important, the aesthetic for development in Harrisburg is, and how important high quality development is. And it is possible for the town to set down its minimum expectations for design quality in its code and then supplement those with voluntary incentives for applicants to follow. So, for example, let's say that the basic rules for a fast food establishment might be set down very clearly, especially with respect to screening of drive-throughs or screening of outdoor equipment or landscaping, etc., that all of those requirements be set down very clearly, what the minimum standards are, but that the UDO might also include some additional voluntary things that the savvy development applicant might choose to incorporate in pursuit of a faster review process, an administrative decision rather than a discretionary decision by elected officials, etc. So we're looking for the win-win. How do we make it easy for development and developers to do what the town is looking for, and make the desired sort of preferred form of development the default process, the path of least resistance. And the way that you do that is through clarifying your minimum expectations and creating some voluntary paths for people to overachieve in pursuit of an easier review process. Along those lines, there's support for potentially pre-approved building or site design. If you set up your fast food establishment in this way, or if your commercial site follows or includes these kinds of provisions like low impact development or very high quality exterior materials, the folks who go that extra mile and go above and beyond the standards should be able to enjoy a faster review process by following designs that are pre-vetted, pre-screened, pre-approved, that the development review process itself becomes faster. That's a quick way for developers to come in, make their investment, and reap their rewards, and for the town to be sure that it's getting the kind of development that it wanted in the first place. So again, looking for the win-win. In North Carolina, we use conditional rezonings as a means of accommodating negotiation between applicants and the town. Applicants come in, propose a development. The town suggests changes, improvements, alternative configurations, and then a negotiation ensues between the applicant and the town, all in pursuit of the best possible development for Harrisburg. This process, the conditional zoning process, works really well, and it's in use in a lot of places in North Carolina. In Harrisburg, the process for conditional zoning is a little bit more complicated. There are additional documents and agreements that need to be prepared, such as development agreements. There are sort of concrete steps in allowable density or site configuration that can sometimes require applicants to propose developments that might be more intense than they originally intended because of the way that the conditional rezoning rules are structured. Not necessarily because there's a problem with the process, but rather the way that the rules of the game are configured in Harrisburg make for applicants having to suggest more dense or more intense development than they intended to do, and looking for ways to remove that process, to simplify conditional rezoning and make it easy for the town to focus on what's really important, which is the highest quality development that it can get. Finally, the last thing that we'll suggest is shortening the development review duration. the period of time that it takes to go from submittal of an application to through review to an approval. That should be made shorter, not necessarily to encourage lower quality development or to permit a unscrupulous applicant from foisting bad development on the town, not at all, but rather to be sure that the quality developers that the town is pursuing recognize that you can come to Harrisburg, do a quality product, make an appropriate level of profit, and therefore improve the town and make that a profitable venture. Because no matter what, if the development community cannot make money on its investments, it will not come to Harrisburg, and you will not have the new Chick-fil-A or the new retail service opportunity or the best, most exclusive housing. That will go elsewhere because of concern over difficulty in development review. So this is a partnership, and the town needs to put its best foot forward with applicants regarding their ability to come in, follow the very clear rules, get the decision that's based on the codified standards, make the profit that they need to, and the town enjoys the kind of development that can result from that. So those are some of the basic suggested recommendations for procedures. Does anyone have any comments about these or want to share any other suggestions for improvement on the procedural side? Okay. Let's talk about substantive change. Remember, these are the actual standards themselves. What are the things in the UDO, landscaping, signage, parking, that kind of stuff? How could those things be changed? And so one sort of suggestion that we make, recommendation that is resonant across all three of these baskets is, again, plainly stating the requirements. Lessen the need for staff guidance in the early stages. Let's spend the time to be very clear about what exactly it is we're looking for. Let's write that down as clearly as we possibly can so that people can understand our minimum expectation is this. Bring us this and you'll get an approval. That's an important aspect to successful development regulation. I'm not for one second suggesting that bar should be very low, that there should be a very low bar for quality or a very low bar for design. Not at all. In fact, I'm saying the opposite. Take the time to be clear about what it is that you expect. Put it down on the page and remove the need to fight and negotiate. Just be clear about what you want and offer a path for folks to do even better. And if they do even better, then reward them by making their process easier. Secondly, you want to ensure that all of your UDO provisions are consistent with state and federal law. There are, unfortunately, problems with some of these aspects in your current UDO. There's some problems with federal law regarding religious and institutionalized persons, with the rules for telecommunications. There's some inconsistency with state law regarding public notice about applications, criminal penalties for violations of the ordinance, etc. We really want to be sure that our house is in order with respect to all of the state and federal laws. Now, these change all the time, and it's necessary to revise the UDO pretty much annually in order to stay consistent with those. But I'll note for everybody that there are some problems in the current regulations that do need to be addressed, and everybody needs to be on notice that the UDO is a living document, that state and federal law is always changing, and Harrisburg's UDO needs to change in response to that. And that's just part of the practice of having a good UDO. Be sure that all of your requirements are codified to avoid confusion from applicants and residents. You heard me mention during the discussion of the stakeholder interviews that some applicants come in and are surprised They're hearing suggestions from staff, albeit provided in good faith, that aren't included in the UDO. And that can be surprising for an applicant who's already spent $60,000 or $70,000 preparing plans to come in for an approval, to hear, additional requirements or things that aren't codified, that may be necessary, that may be important to the elected officials or consistent with what the town is looking for, but are not written down in the document. So we really want to strive to be sure that all of our requirements are codified. They're written down so everybody knows what they are. Finally, and this is something that I think is really important for town staff, for residents, is to check in with each other and clarify, is there inconsistency between land use policy goals and how people who want to live in Harrisburg feel? Is Harrisburg a community of 20,000 square foot single family detached residential lots in, well landscaped neighborhoods? Is Harrisburg something else? What is it that the folks who are living in Harrisburg or who are wanting to move to Harrisburg, what are they looking for? And how can we be sure that the land use policy that we're implementing is consistent with those desires? If we are seeing lots of development applications that come in and go through a lengthy discussion and review process with staff and are then subsequently denied, then that's a sign that something is inconsistent. Either the policy guidance that the applicant was looking through to submit their application, or the interpretation of the current regulations is out of sync with what the regulations say on their face. So numerous large applications that are frequently denied, and we hear, at least from the folks that we've spoken to up to this point, that perception is real. Is that folks are coming in for these approvals and the approval is more rare than the denial. And if that's the case, then it might be worthwhile to check in and make sure that the policy guidance that we're following is consistent with where our elected officials are, where the residents are in terms of their desires for the community. That's not so much a UDO function, but the UDO absolutely needs to reflect and be consistent with the will of the elected officials, the will of the community. A couple other substantive suggestions. We would encourage Harrisburg to really lean in to high quality suburban design in favor of very urban standards where that makes sense. It seems that folks who are moving to Harrisburg like that it's of a moderate density, like that it has a configuration that it's a community of neighborhoods, like that it is a place where people go home at the end of the day rather than where people go to work. Now, whether or not that's accurate, I don't know, and that's something that needs to be explored. But we do think that there's benefit by leaning into the higher quality suburban design and thinking through the current design standards and where those standards might be calling for ultimately an urban development template where buildings are very close to the street. They're 3 stories in height. There's significant amount of attention on the pedestrian environment. Those things are helpful in a town center context, but maybe aren't as helpful in an auto-oriented corridor setting. So something to think about, something to check in on. Sign regulations. I think everybody that we have spoken to agrees the sign regulations need overhauling. There are insufficient options. It is too difficult to administer. In some cases, the allowable signage might be too large. We don't have enough options for what we call uniform signage across a multi-building development. Lots of suggestions and thoughts about overhauling the sign regulations and making those more consistent with what the community is looking for. Simplifying parking standards generally, making sure that we are not being tortuous in our parking standards, making sure that parking is not necessarily driving the development equation, as is so often the case in development across the country. In many cases, the cost of providing for parking outweighs the cost of providing for the building, and that's certainly something to check into. Make sure that we are on trend in terms of our parking standard requirements, being sure that we have proper flexibility and allow applicants to propose alternative solutions that will still work, but that won't have a negative impact on design or the environment. Reviewing and overhauling the current sustainability provisions, including tree protection options. So going into the town's current sustainable development mandates, exploring the range of features that are included there, contemplation of making these voluntary, increasing the kinds of benefits that you receive as an applicant who voluntarily chooses to incorporate sustainability into the development. Again, looking for the win-win, making it profitable for development applicants to make their developments more sustainable. Instead of fighting with them about, including more open space or saving trees or limiting impervious surface, finding ways to make that the path of least resistance, finding ways to make a sustainably developed site easier to establish would be one of our suggestions. Finally, addressing the appearance of single-family development from off-site roadways. Being sure that if I'm driving through town, on one of the many bucolic streets, that I still have that perception of being, in an exclusive, moderate density community that's very focused on the environment, on landscaping, on natural beauty, that those parts of the experience, particularly when you're in your car, are the best that they can be. And that we're focusing on making that part of experiencing Harrisburg the best that it can be. So those are the 10 or so substantive changes that we've identified up to this point. And I know that there's a lot there, a lot to unpack. I'll mention again that this is our opinion. We don't pose this as fact, and that we anticipate more discussion with town leaders, with residents, planning and zoning board, etc., about whether or not these are the right ways to go, and whether or not we're going about it in the right way. So with that, I'll stop for a second and ask, does anybody have any questions about these substantive changes? All right. Okay, I want to be sure. I mentioned at the head of the conversation that engagement is really one of the things that was missing from the last go-round. And we don't want to make that mistake again. We want to be sure that people feel like they've had ample opportunity to share their thoughts, to know what's proposed, to affect the outcome. And so to that end, I will just throw it open for anybody who is here with us today. Are there other issues with the current UDO that you know of, that we need to know about? What needs work? What needs to be improved? And alternatively, what's working now? How are things, the things that are in your UDO that are working great? What are those? Or do you have any other concerns? I'll mention one more time, if you're watching this on YouTube, you can reach out to staff and share those via email or give them a call. If you are on Teams, you can pose those questions in the chat. And then finally, we will be doing another one of these webinars, same presentation, same content, hopefully more polished presentation next time around, since we'll have gone through it once, but we'll be effectively having the same presentation on the 11th of September, and there's another opportunity for you to attend and pose your question at that time if you need more time to think about it today. But with that, I'll stop and ask, does anybody have any questions, any comments, anything they'd like to share?
And I was gonna say, if you're thinking about it and you're typing something out, you can put your hand up and we can unmute you. But we don't see any activity. If you're trying to communicate with us, you can raise your hand through the meeting buttons at the top. It should be up near your camera and your microphone, somewhere up there. But if not, I'll hand it back to you, Chad.
Thanks, Andrew. For sure, if you are on this webinar and you're trying to communicate with us and the technology is not working, please call staff or send them an email and let them know so that we can be sure that those problems don't impede us going forward, particularly with the next webinar that's coming up. So we want to be sure that technology is not a barrier for people to share their thoughts. And with that, I will talk about next steps. Again, this whole effort is aimed at preparation of a code assessment of the current UDO. The code assessment is the blueprint for the new UDO page layout that we would suggest. It identifies a series of themes for improvement, 6, 7, 8, 10 themes, with a series of recommendations embedded under each of them. This document will analyze the policy gaps that exist between what your current land use policy is and what your current regulations are resulting in. So we will identify those gaps and provide some suggestions for closing them as part of a phase 2. Finally, just making sure that we are legally sufficient. Again, that we're consistent with federal law, with state law, with court rulings, court precedent, etc. We'll spend the rest of September and some of October pulling together the initial code assessment draft. That'll be reviewed by staff. We will make some revisions based on the direction that staff provides us, and then we'll bring that revised code assessment document out for public consideration with Planning and Zoning Board and with your town council. And so those are our next steps. This month and next month are focused on this initial version of the code assessment document. Probably be about 100 pages or so. Again, some key themes for improvement, some recommendations about how to update the current UDO, and some more detail on what a new UDO might look like if the town were to codify it based on the recommendations that we're proposing. So that's what you can look forward to in the coming days and weeks. And with that, I will just say thank you. Thanks so much for y'all's time and your attention. We really, really appreciate it and want to encourage you to reach out either to us or to the town and share your thoughts about what things need to be done to improve the UDO. It's a really, really important effort, and we want to be sure that you guys have a voice. I mentioned before, this is being recorded. It'll be posted to the town's YouTube site, and check the town's webpage for links to this recording and the recording that we'll make on the 11th of September. And with that, Zach, I'll hand it back to you if there's anything else that we need to cover.
No, thanks, Chad and Andrew. This was very informative, comprehensive, and as you said, we are looking forward to the full report, which then gives us a blueprint for how we can move forward in making the UDO even more effective and more responsive to the town's desires and policies, and it will improve development and at the same time allow for the public interest to be preserved and protected. So with that, I will I will let everyone know that again, just to remind you, the September 11th at 6 p.m., there will be a second webinar, and you're invited to that one. I'll also mention September 16 is the Planning and Zoning Board meeting, and there will be a presentation similar to this to the Planning and Zoning Board. So there's several other opportunities to hear and to ask questions and to learn more about the process. But with that, again, thank you, gentlemen, and we look forward to seeing you at the next webinar.
Thanks so much.